everyone, and Professor Hong for having me here. And this afternoon, I will present a series ERP study to address two questions. The first one is how to read for comprehension. So in the literature, there are at least two types of comprehension process. The first one is so-called bottom-up integration. That means when you read a sentence, you will retrieve the word's meaning and then try to integrate the meaning into the context. So this is so-called bottom-up integration. But you might have the different experience that is so-called top-down prediction. So you will form the context from word to word by word reading, and then you will actively predict the upcoming word from the context. So this is so-called top-down prediction. So I will present a series study to try to differentiate these two types of reading comprehension. And the second issue is about agent and comprehension. So as you know, the agent have been associated with various kinds of cognitive decline, such as memory, attention, or executive function. And the recent evidence also show that agent may cause qualitative and quantitative changes in language comprehension. So we try to address this question as well. So before going into the detail, here is my outline. I will try to give you a brief introduction about ERP and EEG. And in this series study, I will use the ERP component called N400, which is the ERP component to index the semantic retrieval and integration. And then I will present two series of ERP study for contextual influence. One is to address the Cloze probability or the predictability effect in sentence reading. And the other one is to use the Chinese classifier noun agreement, try to separate two kinds of contextual effect. One is the semantic constraint effect from the classifier, and the other one is the Cloze probability effect on the parent noun. And the data will come from young adult, the college students, the healthy elder, and also patients with different severity of comprehension impairment. So let's start with the EEG and ERP. So I wonder how many of you know about this technique, EEG or ERP? No? Okay, some of you will know. Okay, so at least I think you might heard about EEG, right? So you know our brain has numerous neurons in the brain, and one of the neural technique is EEG, which can allow us to measure the brain potential from the scope. So when you place at least a pair of the electrodes on the scope, you will be able to measure the voltage change with time. So this is the so-called EEG. And ERP is the event-related potential, which means it's a brain, the time-locked brain potential elicited by a specific stimuli or event. So basically, you can try to extract this kind of event-related potential from the continuous EEG. For example, this is an auditory ERP paradigm. So where recording the EEG, the participant will also hear a series of auditory stimuli, let's say 1,000 hertz pure tone, for example. And supposedly this pure tone will elicit a specific brain potential. So you can try to estimate how this evoked potential will look like. So you can chop or cut the EEG into pieces. So this is called an epoch, which is time-locked to the auditory stimuli. And supposedly, here is the epoch. For each of the epoch, it should contain a specific evoked signal and also the random background noise. So when you try to average all these epochs together, the specific evoked signal would be preserved, but the random noise will cancel each other. So you will be able to estimate the evoked potential by the average process, which is trying to increase the signal to noise ratio. So here is the so-called event-related potential. The event-related potential will look like this, with a lot of refractions, and usually the negative going up and positive going down. And we will label this peak with N1, P2, and something like this. So at least for visual recognition, there have been a lot of different ERP components being identified to be sensitive to different stage of word recognition. For example, the M1 and 170, P2 and O, they were sensitive to the orthographic pattern, and also the frequency word class are sensitive to the N400, and there are later components such as LPC, which is related to morphosyntactic processing, and so on. And today we will focus on one of the components called N400, which is an index for semantic congruency or semantic integration. One of the classical study is from Cloze and Chia-Ying in 1980. So in this study, they present the sentence for participants. And the participant in this experiment was silent to read the sentence word by word. And they will present the sentence like, I like my coffee with cream, and so the correct answer should be sugar. But sometimes they also presented any word like socks, which is a semantic incongruent with the context. So the basic finding is that the semantic incongruent word would elicit a greater negativity, which peaked around 400 milliseconds after the onset of the word. So this is so-called N400. And later on, a lot of studies replicate such an effect by manipulate the degree of semantic fit. For example, they manipulate the semantic expectancy, or semantic association, or word frequency, or repetition. So for those words that are easier to be retrieved or to be integrated into the context, they will show much reduced N4. So a lot of studies have support that N400 can be used to reflect the ease of semantic retrieval and integration. And there are also studies to show the agent would affect the response, the N400 responses. For example, this study have participants from 20s to 70s, and they find the N400 responses decrease and in the amplitude and also increase in the latency with age. So that shows that agent might have the effect on the semantic processing. So this is a basic background about N400 and how agent affect this effect. So now we move to how the study evaluate contextual effect. So in the ERP literature, the contextual effect was usually evaluated by the Cloze procedure, as Dr. Tsai just mentioned. So the Cloze procedure will ask participants to complete a sentence frame, like he brought her a pearl necklace for her. So I guess most of you will complete this sentence with birthday, but some of you might complete this sentence with collection. It works too, right? But the percentage of the word that could be used to complete the sentence is the so-called Cloze probability. So this one, birthday, has the higher Cloze probability, but the collection is plausible answer for this sentence frame, but it has the lower Cloze probability. And a well-replicated finding in ERP literature is that the N400 amplitude is inversely correlated with the Cloze probability. So here is a study by DeLong. So in this study, they have a set of sentences with a wide range of Cloze probability of the ending words. So they separate this sentence into two categories. One is the ending word has a higher cross probability, and the other one is a lower cross probability. And they replicate this typical finding. The ending word with low cross probability would elicit greater M4. And they're also trying to look at the relationship between the M400 amplitude and the cross probability. So here is the mean amplitude of M4 as CZ here. And they showed those with higher cross probability will show reduced or smaller M400 amplitude. And such a relationship is most robust in central to posterior regions. So this is quite similar to the typical M400 distribution on the brain, on the skull, sorry. And later on, they also trying to apply the paradigm to healthy elders. And so here is the finding from young adults. So as expected, the low crossword will elicit a greater M4 between 300 to 500 milliseconds, and the distribution is central posterior distributed. But this is the data from older adults, and the data show they still show the significant predictability effect, but the M400 is much reduced and also delayed in time, and they still show the central posterior distribution, but in much smaller magnitude. So our lab trying to replicate this study in reading Chinese sentence. So we also manipulate the so-called cross probability or predictability. But in addition to that, we also manipulate the frequency. So the target word is embedded in the middle of the sentence. We have 2x2 design here. And although we should not read the sentence like word by word, but this is how we do in ERP. So we present word by word here, and we measure the ERP elicited by the target word. And here is the data from M400 and the data from high frequency word and the low frequency word. So as expected, the predictability on M400 was mainly found in reading low frequency word. The low cross probability word would elicit a greater M4 here, and the distribution is central posterior. But in addition to the M400, we also find earlier effect on the anterior M1, which is about 100 milliseconds after the onset of the word. And this effect is frontal distributed. And we find this effect has larger impact for high frequency word. But I don't have time to introduce the nature of anterior M1, but basically this component is quite early, much earlier before the lexical access, and it had been suggested this effect is related to the attentional allocation and also the earlier perceptual processing of the words. So you can see the context also provide top-down information to facilitate the visual processing and the attentional allocation of the expected item. So this is the main finding from the young adults, the college students. So we're also trying to see how agent would have effect on the reading comprehension. But for agent study, we have to modify the paradigm to make it more naturally. So here we have, we manipulate the predictability in the ending words, and we first present the sentence frame for 5,000 milliseconds, and then we present the target word. And they have to decide whether this is the word they expect to complete the sentence. So here's the data by using this paradigm from young adults. So they still show the typical M400 effect, predictability effect on M400, which is central posterior distributed. And then we have healthy elderly to participate in our study. They are about 60 to 70 years old. And here is the data from young adult and healthy adults. So you can see the healthy adult elder, they tend to show much reduced and delayed N400 effect, but the effect is still robust. So basically, this is some kind of replication to the study with alphabetic language. But then we also include affixed patient. They have different severity in their reading comprehension. So all the participants, they have like MMSE, CCAT test to know their cognitive function and also their reading and spoken comprehension. So we subdivided into those affixed patients into two groups. One is have high score in reading comprehension, and the other group have the lower score in reading comprehension. And this is just the distribution. And here is the results from healthy elder that we just saw in previous slides. And this is the data from high reading ability affixed. So you can see they still show the predictability effect. The low predictability words would elicit greater N4 than the high predictability one. But you see the effect shift to the central region. And here is the data from affixed with low reading ability. They also show such an effect, but with much later time window. And the distribution also changed to the frontal region. So to summarize, by using the sentence reading, we replicate the typical central posterior distributed predictability effect on N400 from younger adults. But for elder controls, they show reduced and delayed N400. With affixed, the affixed patient with high reading comprehension ability, they also show reduced and delayed N400, but with central distribution. But for those with really low score on reading comprehension, their N400 is much reduced and prolonged, and also show different distribution, which is mainly from the frontal electrodes. So basically, we think those with really low reading comprehension ability, they still try to comprehend what is going on, but they have to use multiple cue and different resources to read for comprehension. So we show frontal distributed N4. So this is the first part. And then, so I just demonstrate the predictability effect on N400, but the predictability effect itself cannot differentiate the two types of reading process because the faster or higher accuracy in high Cloze words might due to the easier to integrate this meaning with into the context, or due to it's easier to predict the high Cloze word based on the context. So it's not able to differentiate the two type of process. So here I want to add one more parameter, which is the contextual constraint. So you know the Cloze probability already, which it means the percentage of the word that can be used to complete the sentence frame. But the contextual constraint means the number of words that can be used to complete the sentence frame. For example, he brought her a pearl necklace for her birthday or collections. In addition to these two answers, you might feel difficult to think of other alternatives. But for the second sentence, he looks worried because he might broken his arm, leg, cup, treasure, and so on. So there are a lot of different answers that can be used to complete this sentence. So we call the first kind of sentence, the context provides strongly constraint to the following, the ending noun. But the second sentence, the context provide weakly constraint to the ending word. But Kara, Andy and Kara, they have a study trying to manipulate both close probability and contextual constraint with the orthogonal manipulation. But actually, there is a possible confound because it's very difficult to find high crossword for the weakly constrained sentence. So even though in their study, they show interaction between constraint and cross probability, but this data can also be explained by the degree of cross probability. That means this just to reflect the cross probability. So it's hard to say how the contextual constraint affect the ending words performance. So in our lab, we're trying to solve this problem by using the characteristic of Chinese classifier noun agreement. As you know that in Mandarin Chinese, if you want to quantify a noun, you have to have a classifier preceding the noun. For example, you have to say 一条绳子, but not 一绳子. So this is the characteristic of Chinese classifier noun agreement. So for example, 一顶帽子, most of you would, when you heard 一顶, and then most of you would complete with 帽子. But some of you might also give the answer like 假发 or 王冠 or 斗笠 at all. So you actually can measure the cross probability for the following noun. And the other characteristic of classifier is that some of classifier provides strong semantic constraint to the following noun. For example, 一顶帽子, they always used to quantify something on your head. But like 一瓶 or 一个, that can be followed by a lot of different nouns. So here we're trying to separate the contextual effect from classifier and also trying to examine the cross probability from the noun. So here is our experimental design. So we have a 2x3 factorial design. We manipulate the semantic constraint of classifiers, strongly constrained or weakly constrained. And we also trying to manipulate the cross probability of the following noun, high, low, or impossible. And for each trial, the participant will first perceive a classifier, and then a noun will appear. And their job is to perform a possibility judgment to see whether this pair is plausible or not based on a five-point scale. The one referred to impossible and the five referred to plausible and highly expect. And here's the data from college students. So we first we want to see the constraint effect on the classifier. So in this time window, the noun is not appeared yet. But we can see the significant constraint effect on P200 and N400. The weakly constraint classifiers such as 一个 or 一瓶, they will elicit greater N4 and also prolonged frontal activity here. That means even though the noun is not appeared yet, but they start to think of the possible combination, and this is the effect shown on the line. And here is the data from the pairing nouns. And we find interaction between semantic constraint and also the cross probability on N400. So basically, for the strongly constrained classifier, the following noun will show the highly expect noun will show the most reduced N400. But the low cross noun such as 一通流言 or 一顶斗笠, they will elicit large N400s, which is not distinguishable to that elicited by the impossible noun. But for the weakly constrained condition, we can see the gradient cross probability effect. high cross, low cross, and impossible. So we think if we perceive a semantic strongly constrained classifier, the participant would generate the best completion like 电话. And even though the 电报 or 留言 is possible, but it would work like the impossible one. So that's why you can see these two lines goes together. But if you perceive a weakly constrained classifier, then you won't form a strong prediction about the following noun, and then you would be able to see the gradient effect of cross probability on the N400. So now we want to modify this paradigm for elders to see whether the elder would the agent would affect these two effects differently. So we know the elder or the patient that will read much slowly. So here we have to slow down the presentation rate. So the classifier will present for 800 milliseconds, and then with 400 millisecond break, then we will show the noun for 800 milliseconds. And we also trying to make the task demand easier. So this time they just have to decide the possibility based on a 3-point scale. And since we modified the paradigm, we have to collect data from college students again. But here you can see the data from young students, and they still show the constraint effect on the classifier. The weakly constraint classifier was listed greater than 4 here. But this is the data from a healthy elder. They show no effect at all. That means when they perceive the classifier, they're not making prediction about the following noun. And here's the data from the ERP elicited by the pairing noun. And on the left side is the data from younger adults. And this time you see the gradient effect here for the strongly constrained classifier, which is quite different from the previous finding. And on the other side is the data from older, healthy older. They show cross probability effect under a strongly constrained classifier, but not for the weakly constrained classifier. So we think the different findings from the younger adult is due to this time we have a slower presentation rate and much easier task demand. So so the young adult have enough time to think about all the possibilities, so they can show the gradient effect here this time, right? But for the healthy elder, the cross probability can only be found under the strongly constrained condition. That means they either can form the best completion for the strongly constrained classifier, or they find it easier to integrate the noun into the strongly constrained classifier. But they show less flexibility to process low cross noun. So the low cross noun is very similar to the performance of the impossible noun. And with the print comparison, we didn't find any close probability effect under weakly constrained condition. So with the much weak contextual information, they were not able to show the cross probability for the following noun. So to conclude our second set of study, we find the healthy elders show no constraint effect from the classifier, either P2 or N400. And they also show reduced and much delayed cross probability effect on N400. So our data support the ability to use the contextual information is compromised with age. And also we suggest the ERP component such as P200 and N400 may serve as neural marker to evaluate the severity of comprehension impairment. So this is something we want to use in the future studies to for the early identification of elder with mild cognitive impairment and also dementia. So I finished my talk really quick, but I want to acknowledge my collaboration with Dr. Wu Xinzhi at Taipei 轻便瓷器 and also Dr. Fu Zhongling at Taipei 荣总医院 and also my lab members. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, so we have quite a lot of time for questions. So please.
Thanks a lot for the talk, which is really inspiring. So we know from like other studies that older adults may tend to rely on context for stored knowledge compared to younger adults because of the reduction in the sensory processing abilities. I mean, this comment may not be directly related to your paradigm, but you sort of found reduced close probability effect in your semantic, in that context effect. So I'm just curious about how to like make that connection here.
Okay, so when we talk about semantic processing, actually there are two kinds of semantic processing. One is like lexical retrieval, which is related to semantic knowledge. The other one is to try to, like when you read a sentence, you have to build up the context but word by word. So this is another type of semantic processing. So a lot of study by using the ERP technique, they have shown if you have like lexical access task or like just semantic category task, the elder tend to show very similar pattern, although they still show reduced and prolonged N400 in the latency. But when it comes to the contextual information process, sometimes the effect will really different from that found in the younger adults. So they even in the behavioral study, you find the healthy elder, they can talk a lot and maybe they know more vocabulary than you do. But when it comes to use the context or to predict what you're going to say in the future, there's something different. So right now, we're trying to separate these two types of semantic usage for word or for context. And there are also studies trying to use these two types of N400 amplitude to correlate with their executive function or an attentional performance. They showed the N400 for context usage will highly correlate with the executive function. So they show lower executive function score, which also correlate with much reduced N400 amplitude. So this is somehow different or contradictory to what you just mentioned, right? So you think they lost the sensory processing, the difficulty in sensory processing would encourage them to use the context for reading, comprehension, or spoken word recognition. But in fact, when the experimental design really go into what do you mean semantic processing or contextual usage, this is what we found so far, and also in other labs.
So it is possible that even if the older adults have a stronger tendency to rely on context, they're at a neural level, that ability of making use of the contextual semantic information may be different.
Yeah.
So that's still plausible, I think.
And also because I didn't prepare the slide to explain why the older show different distribution on the N400. So, or the face of patient with severe difficulty in reading comprehension, they still show the effect, but the distribution is frontal distributed, right? And so we think there's a debate about the function of frontal N4 and the posterior N4, right? And recently, some studies show the posterior N4 is more related to the semantic retrieval, lexical retrieval. But the frontal N4 is more related to the contextual processing. But it sounds weird why the elder show the frontal processing, right? Our speculation is that so you have strong context that for younger adult you can use that to predict the following noun. And our data show the context can also facilitate the earlier visual processing, attentional location and all. And so basically when they see the ending word, they can process it like a simple lexical retrieval. So they would tend to show the posterior distributed and form. But for the elder, they were not able to use the context to predict what's going on in later. So you have to use multiple information to process the word that show up later. And then they will show much more reliance on the frontal component. So that's one of the possibilities, but of course, more study are needed to clarify if this is correct or not.
Sounds quite convincing to me.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you. Your talk is very interesting.
Thank you.
But then one thing I would like to know is because you are using the composite score for comprehension, is it? So possibly that might lead to certain kind of confoundings.
Could you repeat your
Because you are
question?
using comparing reading comprehension using the CCAT scores.
Yes.
And that is a kind of total score, is it?
Yes.
So there might be many different reasons affecting the low scores, aside from visual word processing. So will there be other confoundings that have not been considered in your?
Yeah. So the CCAT score can be roughly subdivided into reading comprehension and other vocabulary usage. So here we have two scores, and one of them is specific for the reading comprehension. So even though they show not too much difference on the total score, but here we subdivided them based on the subtest for reading comprehension. So so of course we can also use like PDAE or something more sensitive. That is other way to do. But in this study we use CCAT score.
I noticed that in your first study you mentioned you're using the close probability only. You modify your language material for the elder group as putting your target word in the end of the sentence. And so my question is, why did you do this? Because this manipulation may take the risk of being influenced by some other effects like wrapping up effect.
Pardon?
Wrapping up effect.
Wrapping up?
Yes. So because in most of the ERP studies, I noticed that the target words are always embedded in the middle of the sentence, but not in the beginning of or the ending of the sentence. So that's why we put it in there.
Okay. So I think in most of study for eye tracking, they will embed the word in the middle because most of the time you won't fixate your eye to the ending of the sentence. But in most of study with ERP, they will have the target word in the end of the sentence. So it's something different. So in my first set of study, so we want to collect with Dr. Tsai, so we actually have the sense of stimuli. So we have data from eye tracker and also from ERP trying to see how these two different research modality can collaborate with each other and say something about reading comprehension. So in order to embed the word in the middle, so you have to have a really long sentence because you have to have something in preceding the target to form the context. So the sentence would be like 24 to 30 characters for each. That's quite long, and that's very difficult for patients in particular. So in order to study how agent affect the reading comprehension and also for a basic patient, So we have to reduce the, to shorten the sentence. So in average, the sentence would be like 7 to 11, no, 7 to 11 syllables for each. And this time, because we only collect the data from ERP, so we were able to embed the target word in the end of the sentence. So that's why.
I wonder what is the motivation to define elders in the
Sorry, could you loud?
I wonder what's the motivation of dividing elders into healthy ones and aphasic ones.
Okay. Okay, so aphasic patient, they have the brain damage, and probably in different area. And you might heard about Wernicke's or broadcast patient, aphasic patient. So they have different language performance. One is have the difficulty in comprehension, and the other one is the broadcast patient, the major difficulty is in production, but they're okay with the comprehension. Most of them, not everyone. So, so normal elder is just to serve as a control to the aphasic patient, because you know when you're getting old, you have this risk for stroke or other kind of brain injury. So when you want to compare the patient study, you have to know what is the data look like in this age range. So we think it's important, if we want to describe the performance from patient, we also have to have their age range control. But we also aware the agent may also have some effect for contextual information, contextual usage. So that's why we have these 3 sets of participants, and they can be used to address different kind of questions.
So I want to ask a question about the participants. So the young readers, often like the college students, maybe often are in the 20s.
Yes.
But I noticed that the healthy elders, the distribution of the ages ranges from the 50s to 70s.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the year.
Yeah.
So I wonder whether the performance of the 50s varies significantly from the elders in their 70s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So actually, I don't have enough sample size to subdivide them into like each decade. So, but basically, according to the literature, 50 to 70 will also show some decline in the M400 amplitude responses. But the reason that I put the health elder from 50 to 70 is they mainly serve as the age control for the aphasic patient. So each of the aphasic patient, they will have an age match control. For example, this patient is 50, so we find someone 50 with no brain damage, and that's why. But of course, we have collect more than 30 healthy elders. So in the long run, we will, of course, we want to have a closer look at how the age affect the language comprehension, for example, every 10 years, something like that. Thank you. That's great.
Either you like to use the final word to prompt how likely a certain subject would develop some form of impairment.
Can you speak louder?
Okay. Here in this task, you like to use the final word to predict how likely a subject would develop language impairment or things like that.
Yeah.
But in the experiment, you also present a pretty long context.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there is a lot of information that can be obtained within that period that could also serve to predict the chance of developing impairment. And you think that some EEG reforms would help you better identify patients?
Identify patients? So you mean So here I just measure the ERP from the ending words,
Yes.
but maybe you can measure the ERP elicited by each of the word. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So there's a group from German, but I forget his name. Yeah, so they have the continuous recording of the ERP and also eye tracking simultaneously. They also have, for each word, they measure the cross probability and also frequency. So they have a lot of data to do things like that. But that's based on Potsdam sentence corpus. That's a really large database. Yeah, that's something we can do, but of course we have to have such a database, so you have a lot of sentence and you have all the property like word frequency and cross probability for each of the words. So for conducting such an experiment, we have to do a lot of rating before we really can conduct this study. So the easiest way is to measure the cross probability in the ending word, but we don't really have the cross probability for each of the words. That's the limitation that we have. But we also have the second set of stimuli, which is the classifier and noun agreement. So that one is easier. And right now we have a database for classifier, 186 Chinese classifier, and the cross probability of different noun can be paired with the classifier. So that might be something that we can do as you suggest.
Thank you for that. There is one point I didn't understand very well. The experimental results showed that the high frequency corresponds to low predictability and vice versa. But I didn't understand why it's like this.
You mean the predictability effect
Yeah.
in high frequency word?
Yeah.
Okay, I got it. So I think your question is about on N400 we find the predictability effect in both high and low frequency word, but the predictability effect is much more larger for reading low frequency word, which is quite consistent with the previous study, no matter for eye tracking or behavioral measurement. But the N1 component, we find the predictability effect on high frequency word, but not in low frequency word, right? Okay, so our speculation is that we think, so the N1, as I mentioned, it's mainly about the attentional allocation. So we think about, there's an old model called logogen model. That means before the lexical access, each of the word has a resting state before they can be retrieved. So the higher frequency word have a higher resting state, so much closer to the threshold, let's say that. So the context might able to provide the help for the high frequency word to come out or reach the threshold. But for the low frequency word, it's still that it needs much more energy before you can retrieve the lexical information of this word. So we think the contextual information in the earlier stage, only the strong contextual information can help the high frequency word to reach the threshold and then show the effect on the earlier attentional modulation or perception. We have a second study I didn't present here, which is to manipulate the sentence. So we wonder what is the nature of this part anterior N1. So we manipulate the orthographic and phonological similarity of the ending words, and we find the anterior N1 is mainly affected by the orthographic similarity, but not in semantic. So we think that's some kind of supporting evidence, and the pattern is very similar to what we find in this study. So we think that's the different story. So I think the context has different influence on the early and later stage of word recognition. For the early stage, it's mainly for attentional modulation and also for the perceptual processing. And only the high frequency word can perceive and this kind of support and then show the effect of predictability. So that's our story.
In your study, as I can see, the N400 just reflects the ease of processing, the more easy to process the lower N400.
Yes.
And in the literature, there might be another N400 which relates to the comprehension or imaginability.
Yes.
That is, more concrete, the higher N400 we will see. So what do you think these two types of N400, are they the same components or not? If not, what mechanism they reflect?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so what you mentioned is the so-called concreteness effect. So more concrete words like noun, they tend to show larger N4. But in terms of reaction time, you tend to show faster reaction time to the noun relative to that for the verbs. So it's hard to say, it's easier to process the noun but show the greater N4. So this is something different from what we found here. So this, I don't know if they are the same or not, but they basically manipulate something different here. One is to show, so the comprehensive effect on N400 is reasoned as, so the concrete word would associate with more semantic attribute, and then more attribute would show greater M4. That's why. But here it's basically to show the semantic congruent or the high cross one will show reduced M4. So it's not about how many semantic association that it have. So most of the, in this case, they would have the preceding context or a pair of words that are semantic related or not, something like that. So I have no answer about whether they are the same or not. But there is another example. For example, the orthographic neighborhood size. So the more neighbor the word have, in terms of reaction time, you will get a faster lexical decision time. But you also find a larger N400 here. So the N400, so how you use N400 really depends on how you want to take the property of this component. So they are, I don't know, yeah, but I think your question is great.